Siberia. Outside the cab, the temperature has dropped to -50 degrees Celsius. Just a few minutes in the freezing wind is enough for your body to begin losing heat. And yet, every night, thousands of truck drivers sleep inside these very cabs. Most people assume they simply park the truck and go to sleep, but the reality couldn't be more different. As frost begins covering the windows, the engine often has to keep running for hours just to hold on to what little warmth remains inside the cab. Outside, the wind sweeps across the forests of Siberia, while the road ahead stretches for hundreds of kilometers through empty wilderness. Every night, drivers face one danger after another, where a single mistake can leave them stranded in a place where help may never come. Diesel fuel can begin to gel. The battery slowly loses its power. By morning, the engine may refuse to start. Some drivers even rely on homemade heaters inside the cab, accepting the risk of fire or explosion simply to keep themselves from freezing. If the engine shuts down completely, the cab begins losing heat almost immediately. Before long, the driver's only shelter becomes nothing more than a freezing steel box. Why do so many truck drivers leave their engines running all night instead of risking a shutdown? And what does it really take to survive when the temperature outside plunges to -50 degrees Celsius? Tonight, we'll follow one truck driver from sunset until the first light of dawn. By the end of this journey, you'll discover that surviving a night in Siberia isn't about how well you can endure the cold. It's about everything a driver must do, long before darkness falls. Winter sunsets come quickly in Siberia. Within a matter of minutes, the last light slips below the horizon, leaving the long highway wrapped in the blue-gray tones of snow and a darkening sky. The driver looks at the distance still ahead, then makes his decision. He won't be driving any farther tonight. To many people, that decision might seem hard to understand. If there's a town farther up the road, why not keep driving for a few more hours and find a warmer place to spend the night? But in Siberia, the distance shown on a map and the distance you experience in reality are often two very different things. Between two settlements can lie hundreds of kilometers of taiga, with almost no homes, no repair garages, and rarely another vehicle in sight. Once darkness falls and fatigue begins to set in, continuing to drive can become far more dangerous than stopping. That's why spending the night in the cab isn't a last resort. It's a planned part of the journey. Experienced long-haul drivers know well in advance where they'll stop, when they'll stop, and exactly how much fuel they'll need to make it through the night. But parking the truck is only the first step. The driver grabs a flashlight, steps onto the snow, and slowly walks around the tractor unit. He checks the tires, inspects the hoses, looks over the fuel tank, and makes sure the auxiliary heater is still working properly. The entire inspection takes only a few minutes, but it's always done before the temperature reaches its lowest point. The driver knows that overlooking even the smallest detail now could leave him with no chance to fix it a few hours later. By the time dawn approaches and the cold reaches its peak, every mistake becomes far more costly. And that's when the real battle begins. The surprising part is that the driver's first opponent isn't his own body. It's the truck itself, sitting motionless in the Siberian night. As the cab door closes and the driver settles into his seat, the work is far from over. Before he can think about keeping himself warm, he has to make sure the truck can survive the night. It may sound strange, but in Siberia, you're only as safe as the machine that's still running. The first enemy is diesel fuel. In extreme cold, the natural paraffin in diesel begins to crystallize into tiny wax particles. At first, they're almost impossible to see, but as the temperature continues to fall, they clump together, gradually clogging the fuel filter. Eventually, the engine can no longer get enough fuel to keep running. The dangerous part is that it happens silently. The driver may notice nothing unusual until the engine begins to lose power, shudder violently, and finally stall in the middle of the night. At that point, it's no longer just a mechanical problem. It becomes a race against time and against the cold itself. That's why drivers in the coldest regions never rely on regular diesel during winter. Instead, they switch to winter-grade fuel or add special additives that lower the temperature at which the paraffin begins to crystallize. Small precautions like these often determine whether the truck will start the next morning or not. But even if the fuel keeps flowing, the truck still has another weak point: the battery. The colder it gets, the slower the chemical reactions inside the battery become, reducing its ability to deliver electrical power. A battery that's perfectly healthy in summer can lose much of its strength after just one night in sub-zero temperatures. That's why many drivers rarely shut the engine off when stopping for the night. Instead, they let it idle for hours, keeping the engine warm while making sure the electrical system stays charged. It burns more fuel, but that's still far cheaper than recovering a stranded truck in the middle of the wilderness. Even so, leaving a heavy-duty engine idling all night isn't an ideal solution. It wastes fuel, increases engine wear, and produces unnecessary emissions. That's why many modern trucks are equipped with a second system, smaller, but just as important. With the push of a button, it takes over the job of keeping the cab warm without relying on the main engine. That's when a device known as the Webasto heater comes to life. And for countless drivers across Siberia, it's this small machine, not the engine, that often decides whether the night will end in restful sleep or a fight for survival. Once everything outside has been carefully checked, the driver climbs back into the cab and shuts the door firmly behind him. From that moment on, this tiny space, just a few square meters wide, will be his only home until sunrise. The bitter cold remains just beyond the metal walls, only centimeters away. What surprises many people is that the cab is never heated like a normal room. The driver keeps it only warm enough to slow the loss of body heat. The greater the difference between the inside and outside temperatures, the faster the cab loses heat whenever the door is opened, while also creating more condensation on the windows and metal surfaces. By now, the main source of heat no longer comes from the engine. It comes from an independent heater that drivers simply call Webasto. This compact unit burns only a small amount of fuel to produce warm air, keeping the cab comfortable for hours without having to keep the massive engine running. It has completely changed the way long-haul trucks make it through the Siberian winter. Even with a heater, the driver can't simply rely on warm air to get through the night. When it's finally time to sleep, they change into dry clothes, pull on thick socks, and climb into a heavy-duty sleeping bag built for extreme cold. The heater only creates a more comfortable cabin. Their final and most reliable layer of protection is still what they're wearing. Dinner is much simpler than most people would expect. Instead of elaborate meals, most drivers choose foods that are easy to store and packed with calories, such as canned goods, bread, sausages, or instant noodles made with hot water. In extreme cold, the body burns far more energy just to stay warm, making a proper meal every bit as important as proper clothing. Even drinking water has to be carefully managed. Leave a bottle near the cab door for a few hours, and it may begin to freeze. That's why many drivers keep their water close to a heat source, or store it in insulated bottles. That way, they'll still have drinking water the next morning, without waiting for the ice to melt. There's one thing almost every experienced truck driver agrees on: they never drink alcohol before going to sleep, even though many people believe it helps keep the body warm. That feeling of warmth is only an illusion. While the driver thinks everything is fine, the body is actually losing heat more quickly, quietly slipping toward dangerous hypothermia. Once everything is ready, the lights inside the cab go out one by one. Outside, the wind continues sweeping snow across the road as the temperature falls with every passing hour. Inside, the driver tries to drift off to sleep, knowing that in just a few hours, the coldest part of the day will arrive, and if anything goes wrong, around 4 o'clock in the morning, surviving the rest of the night will become far more difficult. If the cold is the most obvious enemy, the real dangers of the night are often completely invisible. Most serious accidents don't happen because the temperature drops too low, but because of seemingly minor mistakes made while trying to stay warm inside an enclosed space. One of the greatest dangers is carbon monoxide. It's colorless, odorless, and gives no immediate warning. If the heater malfunctions or exhaust gases leak into the cab, the driver may begin to feel drowsy, develop a headache, and gradually lose consciousness without ever realizing what's happening. That's why, before settling in for the night, checking the heater isn't just about staying warm, it's also a critical safety check. For many veteran drivers, a reliable heater is more important than a comfortable bed, because they know a single malfunction can turn the cab into an extremely dangerous place. Another threat comes from the snow itself. During long hours of parking, snow can build up around the exhaust pipe or block ventilation openings. If it isn't cleared in time, exhaust gases can be forced back into the cab instead of escaping outside. That's why many drivers always inspect the area behind the truck before starting the engine or going to sleep, especially after strong winds or heavy snowfall. The cold deceives the body in another way as well. As core body temperature begins falling to dangerous levels, people don't always feel colder. Instead, their ability to think clearly and make sound decisions gradually fades, making hypothermia difficult to recognize. That's why experienced drivers focus on staying dry, eating enough, and resting before exhaustion sets in, rather than waiting until they feel unbearably cold to take action. After years of driving across frozen highways, Siberian truckers have passed down countless lessons from one generation to the next. They always carry spare dry clothing, a flashlight, emergency blankets, and essential gear that can be grabbed instantly if they ever have to leave the cab in an emergency. Those items are rarely needed, but no one wants to be without them on the one night they matter most. So far, everything seems to be going according to plan. The cab is still warm, the heater is still running. Outside, there's nothing but the sound of the wind and an endless blanket of snow stretching to the horizon. But drivers who've spent decades on these roads know the most dangerous moment of the night is still ahead. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, when the temperature reaches its lowest point and the driver has been asleep for hours, even the smallest malfunction can bring every carefully made plan crashing down. The most frightening thing isn't the cold outside, it's the moment the truck stops running. For a driver in Siberia, the instant the engine dies, the truck is no longer a safe shelter. In that moment, every plan changes. The truck is no longer just a vehicle. It's the only roof overhead, the only source of warmth, and the last barrier separating the driver from the brutal cold outside. Once the engine stops, the challenge is no longer how to continue the journey, it's how to stay alive. The first thing experienced drivers do is not climb out to investigate. They stay calm and figure out the cause. Has the diesel gelled? Is the battery too weak? Or has the heater simply failed? Each problem requires a different solution, and guessing wrong can waste the most valuable minutes they have. If the engine can't be restarted right away, the next rule almost never changes: stay inside the cab. For many people, the first instinct might be to walk for help, but on Siberia's remote highways, that's often the most dangerous choice of all. In darkness and blowing snow, visibility can shrink to just a few meters. Wander only a short distance off the road, and it's easy to lose your bearings. Meanwhile, a stranded truck is a large, visible target that rescue teams or passing drivers can spot from far away. That's also why drivers always keep a survival kit inside the cab. A cold-weather sleeping bag, dry clothes, spare gloves, a flashlight, high-energy food, and drinking water are all stored where they can be reached within seconds. These supplies are rarely needed, but if something goes wrong, they can buy precious extra hours of survival. Many trucking companies also require their drivers to check in at scheduled intervals. If a truck remains stopped for too long or misses a scheduled report, dispatch knows something is wrong. In areas without cell service, satellite tracking often becomes the only way to locate a truck among hundreds of kilometers of snow-covered wilderness. Even after a distress signal has been sent, the driver must be prepared to wait for hours. On Siberia's most isolated roads, rescue vehicles can't arrive within minutes the way they might in a city. That's why the ability to stay safe on your own during those first critical hours is more important than counting on outside help. Fortunately, situations like these are rare, not because Siberian winters have become any less unforgiving, but because drivers have learned to prepare for the worst long before it happens. They understand that in this land, complacency is the greatest danger of all. After hours of darkness, 4 o'clock in the morning finally arrives. This is usually the coldest time of the entire day. The sun is still below the horizon, leaving only a faint band of pale blue light in the distance, while the temperature has fallen to its lowest point since nightfall. The driver wakes to an almost unsettling silence. He switches off the heater that kept him warm throughout the night, takes a deep breath, and settles into the driver's seat. After everything he prepared the night before, it all comes down to one question: will the truck start? He inserts the key and turns on the electrical system. No experienced driver would crank the engine immediately in weather like this. Instead, he patiently waits a few seconds, allowing the truck's systems to complete their final checks before waking an engine that has sat motionless all night in temperatures dozens of degrees below zero. Then he turns the key. The starter motor begins dragging the engine through one heavy rotation, then another. Dry metallic sounds echo through the cab, but the engine still refuses to fire. For a brief moment, the cab falls completely silent. The driver keeps his hand on the key, quietly listening to every sound coming from the engine bay. After years of driving across Siberia, he knows the next few seconds will decide everything. Either the engine comes back to life and the journey continues, or the truck remains stranded in one of the coldest places people still have to cross. Then, without warning, a deep rumble breaks the silence. The engine shudders violently before settling into its familiar rhythm. A plume of white exhaust drifts slowly from the tailpipe, dissolving into the freezing morning air. Only seconds ago, everything depended on hope. Now, the driver knows he has overcome the night's greatest test. Once the engine reaches operating temperature, the driver packs away his sleeping gear, steps outside for one final inspection, and slowly eases the truck back onto the road. Fresh tire tracks press into the snow, while hundreds of kilometers of frozen highway still stretch ahead through the vast taiga. The truck rolls steadily along the snow-covered highway. Hundreds of kilometers of frozen wilderness still lie ahead, while the winter sun has only just begun to rise above the horizon. For Siberian truck drivers, this isn't the end of a battle. It's simply the beginning of another day. And in just a few hours, when darkness falls once again, the entire challenge will begin all over again.